Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for another Freight in the City webinar in association with Volvo. I'm your host for the session, George Barrow, and today we've got an expert panel who will be discussing the route to decarbonisation in long-haul trucks. So thank you all for joining us. We'll start if everybody seems to be ready. So with 2035 and 2040 set as the two deadlines for ending the sale of combustion engines, engine trucks, the first for vehicles under 26 tonnes and then for all vehicles over 26 tonnes, the industry needs to really begin to think about how they will transition, not just in terms of operating products, but also the infrastructure around zero emission vehicles and the towns and cities that they enter. Today, we're going to hear from three excellent speakers who will cover a range of issues and solutions to achieve these targets and of having only zero emission vehicles on sale by 2040. Up first is James McGreechy, Technical and Program Director at Zemo Partnership, who will talk us through the electrical vehicle landscape. John Comer, Volvo Trucks Product Manager, will then talk us through some of the product solutions and how the market is expected to evolve. And we'll finish up with Sandor Doretta, Global Business Development Manager for e-trucks at ABB e-Mobility, who will explain some of the charging solutions to help get us there. The speakers will then be taking questions. So if there's anything you need to ask, don't hesitate to put a question to the panel in the Q&A section in the Zoom call here. Right, James, if you're ready, I will transfer the screen over to you and we can begin.
Thank you very much, George. And good morning, everyone. As George mentioned, yes, I'm going to start things off with a high-level overview of the sector around electric HGVs and the various incentives and measures that also apply to zero-emission trucks. And then I'll hand off to the real experts in John and Sandor, so they can dive into more detail. So, first thing I'd like to address, if I can get the slides to advance, there we go, is, Zemo Partnership, just as a little introduction effectively to kind of establish our credentials, I suppose. So Zemo Partnership, we're a public-private partnership providing an independent view and analysis of low carbon and zero emission solutions for all forms of road transport. So we are a small not-for-profit organisation, so our strength really lies in our membership, of which there are 240 plus organisations, everybody from Volvo to National Grid to the World Wildlife Fund. So, and it's that capability really that allows us to kind of sit in the centre of the net zero discussion, interfacing with whether it's government, industry, and a wide range of stakeholders. So hopefully we know a little bit about the sector and the areas that we're going to talk about today. So a quick sort of snapshot of where we are. So in terms of commercial vehicle registrations, the information on the screen at the moment is extracted from Department of Transport statistics. Unfortunately, they're only published at the moment up to 2020. But essentially what we see, particularly with the green line, which is personal heavy goods vehicles, there is an impact associated with COVID-19 in 2020, as you would expect. What I can say, although not shown on the graph, but with the unofficial figures that are available, that there's a strong recovery in 21. But kind of stating the obvious a little bit, supply chain challenges at the very least are restricting things in 2022. But one thing that is universal across the piece is there is an increasing number of miles driven by those vehicles that are registered. And in terms of, why is that a factor? Why do we care almost? Well, okay, UK domestic transport emissions are a pretty significant contributor to our greenhouse gas emissions in the UK, and 16% of those that are road transport associated with heavy duty vehicles. So it's kind of just setting the scene a little bit. So with that information, so where are we in terms of ultra low emission trucks or zero emission trucks? Emerging market, I think anybody involved in the industry will say that. 0.3% of new HGV registrations in 2021, a small number, a much better number than the year that preceded it in 2020, but really an indicative of the maturity of the market. I think battery electric vehicles or BEVs are starting to emerge with traditional OEMs, and indeed with Volvo, as you will hear more of today. And there are new entrants such as the likes of Volta as well also coming to the market. But the simple fact of the matter really is that HGVs are a bigger challenge to electrify, both in terms of the use cycle and and the journeys and distances travelled, and also the mass and payloads associated with the journeys. And just to illustrate that very briefly, using some of my own calculations, so nothing official, but for example, a 44-ton HGV with a 400-mile range probably requires something in the order of a 1 megawatt-hour battery, which roughly would constitute a 5-ton mass. And obviously, where battery mass is added, then obviously there are implications associated with payload. So hence why it's a difficult proposition, and why the industry is working very hard to try and crack this particular nut. In terms of government policy and incentives, etc., around zero emission, we're all, I'd like to think we're all obviously aware of the phase-out dates that were initially announced at COP26, and indeed reinforced in recent government responses to the non-zero emission consultation. So 2035 for new vehicles of 26 tonnes and under, and 2040 for new vehicles greater than 26 tonnes. So in effect, from 2040, sorry, all new HGVs sold in the UK must be zero emission at the tailpipe. Worth noting that that applies to N2 and N3 category vehicles, which is the majority in that area. There are others that aren't included and or are addressed elsewhere. I've listed a few there, such as bus and coach, off-road vehicles, special purpose, etc. So, but in the main, N2 and N3 by 2040, all zero emission at the tailpipe. Newly sold vehicles, obviously existing vehicles in the market will continue to operate. So that's kind of the challenge. What's available to us in the market to kind of incentivize that and perhaps make the transition a little easier? First and most obvious is the plug-in truck grant. Here I've just kind of used the N3 aspect as an example. And just to give a quick summary of the criteria, so requires a minimum zero emission range of 60 miles for an applicable vehicle. That then gets you up to 20% off the purchase price. However, it is limited to £25,000. And there are a limited number of grants available per year. So it does get slightly complicated. So there's 100 grants at the 25,000 mark, 5 per organisation. Then 250 at £16,000 are available after that, 10 per organisation. And then beyond that, it becomes a £5,000 grant and a maximum of 1,000 grants per organisation per year. So not necessarily the most straightforward. And the grant availability, though, as of last week, has been extended to 24-25, which is good news. And it's also fair to say that some challenges have been had in the market in terms of applying for and securing grants. And the government has recognised that, largely through organisations like ourselves and in an industry such as Volvo feeding back, and also in the response to the non-zero emission consultation, there was a lot of feedback to say, this perhaps isn't necessarily working at its optimum, and government has acknowledged that they will review the plug-in truck grant and see whether they can optimise it further. The exact details of that are not known to date, but there is an acknowledgement that it's coming under review. On to other things. So zero emission road freight or zero emission road freight trials. There was an announcement associated with this last week at ITT Hub. And this is like a release of funding of £200 million over 3 years, specifically for large-scale demonstration of zero-emission HGVs and the associated infrastructure. Recognising that scale and charging infrastructure are 2 key obstacles. The exact timing of the competitions are to be announced, but unofficially, our expectation within the industry is that this will be summertime, probably before summer recess. And initial focus will be on battery electric vehicles and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, with the potential for electric road systems following at a later date, but that's yet to be confirmed. And indeed, this is a follow-on from some basic trials that took place last year that were funded up to 20 million. Alongside that announcement observed, there was also a call for evidence announced. And this was in recognition to potential exemptions for the 2035 phase-out date, so for vehicles under the 26 tonnes. And the idea that such vehicles may need until 2040 to complete the transition. And these are, like, vehicles that have probably got more unusual applications or operating more unusual locations. So some examples have been quoted around heavy or abnormal loads, additional power demands, etc. So again, the government, based on the feedback they received to date, is aware that there could be significant challenges in other areas. And they are essentially have created this consultation in order to understand better what those challenges may be. And for general information, I think that corporate evidence, closes on the 22nd of July. And you can find the actual corporate evidence itself on the government website. So if you like, that's kind of around the kind of national government stuff. Local authorities themselves are also taking action, implementing policies that will have an effect in the commercial vehicle zone. And the most obvious for this would be zero emission zones. So obviously clean air zones already exist, and indeed they require vehicles, typically commercial vehicles, to be at Euro 6 levels. But around zero emission zones, Oxford is probably leading the way here. They're running a small pilot trial, which was launched at the start of this year, which was around a small number of streets in the city, and it's around the basis of a daily charge per vehicle, with zero emission vehicles being exempt, ultra low emission vehicles pay an amount, and then anything below Euro 6 in terms of diesel vehicles basically pays a higher amount. And as you can see from the image on the screen, that initial trial then expands into a wider area. So in the UK, kind of Oxford is leading the way, but several major European cities have announced that they intend to do something similar and have zero emission zones in place, certainly to commercial vehicles in the 2025 timeframe. So very quick whistle stop tour, half an eye on the clock and trying to keep us to time. But essentially that just gives a very brief overview of kind of where the market is today, and also the kind of measures and incentives that are in place around zero emission and electric HGVs in particular. And as George mentioned, there is a Q&A session to follow. If anything does pop up post that, then please sort of contact me directly, and I'll do my best to answer any questions. And that's me. Back to you, George.
Thank you very much, James. Yes, thank you for doing my job as well for me there. Yes, reminding everybody that there is a Q&A function on this chat, so make sure you use that. I see that some people have put some things into the chat side of it. Please use the Q&A portion instead, so we can see when your questions come in and talk about them after the next presentation. So I'm just going to hand over to John Comer now, who will talk you through the Volvo product offerings that will be available in the electric range. John, are you there?
Yeah, George, how are you? All right?
Very well, thank you, John.
Good. Yeah, so taking the theme a little bit further, obviously there's a lot of talk about electric vehicles, but we've just heard from James, and there's an awful lot of discussion that's just happened now within the last few days. And then the other key element for us now is obviously we've got the 2035 and 2040 dates. We're really now into a phase about making it work. Let's see if the slides work now. There's a slow delay on there. Yeah, so James talked about the UK government cut-offs, but at Volvo Trucks, I suppose we've been around for a while, so we're known as a legacy truck manufacturer. So we have a roadmap, because of course we've got to provide the services that society wants today. So internal combustion engines is a key part of the elements that we offer. We still have a framework that we've got to meet within that. So we've got the Vecto challenge with regards carbon reduction, and obviously from an operating side, the energy efficiency of those engines. So that Vecto rating is there today, and it's part of our drive to deliver 15% carbon reduction by 2025. That's one key element. And also with regards to air quality, Euro 7 is still very much part of that focus. So how these gradients will develop over time will obviously depend on the technology and how the technology pans out between 2035 and 2040. Obviously, we're using low carbon fuels. We're very successful with methane, where we see a 20% reduction in the tailpipe already. And that's probably one of the key elements for us. We totally disagree with the technology path. This technology path is completely focused on one area, which is electric and zero tailpipe. The other key element is, where did that fuel come from? What's the carbon relationship with relation to the fuel? And again, we've been on our decarbonisation journey for a long time. We have 2 carbon neutral factories in Europe where the assembly is totally carbon neutral. And we're also on a journey with regards to low carbon steel. Obviously not taking the carbon out of the steel, but obviously looking at the energy within there. So our roadmap is very much well to will rather than from tank to tailpipe. So, and we believe that we've got to consider that going forward, because we're not just a UK manufacturer, we are a global manufacturer, and not one size will fit all. So our target is very much fossil-free 2040. And as I say, we acknowledge the 2035 cutoff and the 2040, and that's why we have to step up the pace and work with customers to achieve those targets. I'm not sure if someone could put on to the next slide. It seems to have slight delay. There we are. So that's our plan. Obviously, battery electric is available now. We are moving to heavy duty battery electric. In 2025, we will have fuel cell electric. But again, the key element there is where the carbon is with regards to the fuel. James also hit on the subject of the cut-off dates. And for us as a vehicle manufacturer, the cut-off in weights is not the key issue. The cut-off in weight is really about the segment. So today our offer is very much focused on back to base, short cycle, refuse and distribution. And the other element within 26 tonne, and with regards to the consultation, there is a consultation to discuss the segments that cannot be achieved easily. So for example, dangerous goods and ADR, there's a little bit of debate starting on that now. The other key element for us is trucks are not just about freight. 30% of what we sell are service vehicles. So they're there to provide a service, so they need power on the move. And that's a key element in terms of a truck's operation. How do we manage a truck that's there to provide a pumping service, a fire engine, a gully sucker, a road sweeper, that have precious demands for chassis space as well as energy. And again, the good news for us is from this month, we will be out there with the order book open for long haul electric vehicles, with production starting in week 37 this year. Yes, we fully welcome the £200 million boost to this sector. James touched on the incentives. The incentives are where incentives exist in markets, the uptake for electric vehicles has grown. Again, we saw it with the bus market in 2009 with a very good incentive. The bus market transitioned very quickly, but they often say freight doesn't buy a return ticket, but then internet shopping came on board. So we buy the goods and then we see if they fit and then we send them back again. But, you know, this is a really important section for us. Yes, we appreciate there's some catenary trials, and we appreciate that there's some stuff being done on fuel cell with the electric. But the key thing is Sandar's got some charging. I've got some trucks. We can look at DNOs. The key element is the operator delivering the services that we require how do they do that? How do they build that business model? So this money is really good to challenge that, because again, we've got no particular operator that will say, I want to take 20 trucks today, because they've still got to deliver the service. But they might take 1 or 2 and work with Sander on the charging. So this is really key to look at the timing and everything around that vehicle. We have to remember we're selling commercial vehicles. You know, you can have a Polestar, go to work and leave it charging all day. These vehicles are moving all the time. So anyone who thinks that the transition is the same as cars, well, that's completely different. So obviously, Sandar's going to talk about the charging. We're very much focused on back to base at the moment. Obviously, the goose that lays the golden egg might be some element of public charging, and we would love to see that with Project Rapid to consider trucks. Range is a key element for us. Like I said earlier, we have range simulation tools, but we also have to consider that trucks don't do the same journey every day. They're not like buses. So we've got this tool to develop us and look at the energy demand. Another key element for us as truck manufacturers is working within the current framework of legislation with regards to payload and axle configurations, and also having a look at the issues to ensure that within that payload and axle configuration that the customer can still maintain the level of productivity and service that they deliver with a diesel truck. And the crucial thing here is that diesel is a brilliant fuel when it comes to energy density. You know, for 100 litres of diesel will cover the same cycle as 540 kilowatts of battery power, but the batteries are 3 tons. So we've got to really consider that, and that's a vital part of what we do, because after all, we're a truck manufacturer, and that's our base product. So the key element then for us was obviously finding in the response last Thursday the discussion that there will be 2 tons available for zero emission vehicles for the vehicles described in the consultation document. But from a commercial side, we need a much bigger statement than this. We need some drawn out directives about what that really means. So, you know, 2 tons, yes, it's great. We've only got 1 ton on 2-axle and 1 ton on 3-axle vehicles today. So what this really means to us and our operators is crucial to ensure that commercially this sector really now moves. Yes, there is a bit of disappointment that, yeah, we're restricted to 44 tons. We still believe as a Swedish truck manufacturer that there is so much more to be gained out of higher payloads, and that could be easily achieved today in the first level of decarbonisation, with diesel trucks running on HVO, running at higher weights, on green corridors, at night, servicing the pallet network, which would also complement and support the driver shortage. So we have a range up and running, the FL and FE, that's primarily short haul and distribution. Yes, the truck, or these 2 trucks, particularly a 3-axle and 2-axle, can benefit from the 2 ton additional payload. And it was really good to go and see the factory for the first time where these vehicles were built yesterday. So it's quite amazing to see an electric vehicle going down the same line as a diesel vehicle and even a gas CNG vehicle. So again, in terms of integration, it is moving, and it is moving into this project. And the aim of that particular factory is around about 2,000 BEVs in the current year. So fascinating to see how the integration is working within the line. With regards to the 18 tonner, if we look at the additional 2 ton, we've got to start looking at the payload and the weight distribution. The axle weights are staying the same. The drive axle is 11.5 tons, so we have to focus on putting more weight on the front. Today, we traditionally use an 8-ton front axle, so we'll be looking maybe up to a 10-ton front axle to give us that all-important weight tolerance. But of course, that's also dependent on where we put the batteries on the vehicle. So again, you know, today we can put an extra tank or put a bigger tank on a vehicle to cope with the additional scope of what that vehicle may do. But with regards to the battery at 0.5 ton a piece, we don't have that flexibility. So range and weight distribution in the consultation with our customer is key. If we look at 26 going to 28, we definitely need a 10-ton front axle. Today we do 9 tons, but 9 and 19 takes you bang on 28 tons. So we need to have load flexibility there with regards to the operation of the vehicle, particularly a fridge vehicle with a diminishing load. And then for the construction truck, we completely transition the type of vehicle we run today, where we have the balance of 2 tons, 2 axles on the front and 2 at the back. We go to a trident solution to get the energy on board the vehicle. And even today, under a diesel regime, we have a slight difference in load tolerance based on the legal demands for the bogie. So if we go to 34 ton on a trident, then we've got no loading tolerance at all. So we've got 24 ton legally allowed on the rear, 10 ton on the front, and this is a key sector for construction. This is probably the most important one when it comes to payload. There are no pallets on a tipper, there's no pallets on a tanker. This is all about productivity. So the question from the operator would be, why would I want to transition to this today when I get no physical benefit? In fact, my efficiency drops and my service level drops. So a movement with regards to the axle weights is key also to this transition. So heavy tractors, yes, they're available now, and they will be in production in week 37. We'll have 4x2, 6x2, and 6x4. They will have a 3-motor system developing 490 kilowatts, but being a traditional diesel man, I like horses. So 666 horses, that really is the number of the beasts. And again, the other thing to drive the vehicle and deliver the tractive effort, we will be using a 12-speed gearbox, and we will also be using energy-saving features that we've developed on the diesel range, such as predictive cruise control in the form of IC. Yes, talking about the batteries and the density, when we look at the chassis, we are hungry for space. The batteries take up the sides of the chassis, and where we had the components on the chassis before, where we think that we could lower the cab, we can't, because the unit where the engine set is now known as the MOOC, which is basically the module under the cab. So all those components are placed in that area. And again, the other key thing we have to bear in mind is the weight distribution changes. Typically a 4x2 tractor weighs 7.5 ton. These vehicles will weigh 10, and the battery focus moves towards the drive axle. So today unladen, they're 2 ton, they move to 4. So this is a key part, as well as the range and the charging, in terms of this total consultation with our customer base. And then working back to the note that was made last Thursday, you know, what we would really welcome, and we're pleased to see that maybe we move the 40 ton to 42 ton, but we also need to consider the tractor unit to make sure that that moves from 18 to 20 ton to allow us to work the distribution system that exists today. You know, there's around about 240,000 semi-trailers already in the business, and they're not going to change. So we need to make sure that we're able to flex with that. And then when it comes to 44 ton, which is the biggest segment in the UK, it's around about 50% of what is sold annually. The architecture for the vehicle currently does not work within the legal framework for length. So with regards to energy density, we have to go to a tag design with a very long wheelbase, and so we end up over length. We have no payload advantage in the regulation, and at this moment in time, our drive line is designed towards a 44 ton maximum. So the solution that we're working towards, is maybe moving back to a 42 ton combination with a 300 kilometer range to work this into the current distribution systems that already are out there today. And range is key, and Sandor will probably cover all the key elements that we want to know about charging, but understanding range is crucial. So with regards to the sales office, we will look at the range. From the customer offer, we will have the ability to look at the range in the office. The driver will have an app that looks at the range and other functions on the vehicle, and the vehicle will have a navigation system that also gives and reinforces the data with regards to energy for the vehicle. And again, obviously, we're going to get very efficient drivers. Today, a driver can drive the vehicle and look at the fuel consumption after the event. If the driver drives the vehicle hard today, he might not get home. So it's a different way of looking and managing energy, but we're managing energy before the event rather than after the event. And to get that energy on board within the heavy tractor, it has a 43 kilowatt wall-mounted AC charger, which would charge within 10 hours. But to get the distribution system working, and Sander would develop on this, currently with 250 kilowatts on board, to get 80% of the energy into the vehicle will take an hour 25. And obviously, as the battery fills, the ability for it to take on more slows down. And then the other key element is where is the charging unit on the tractor unit? Because these vehicles are 16.5 meters long. We've got depots, we've got one-way systems. So if we're going to design and work with Sandor, we need to understand where the connection is, which is on the right side behind the cab on our particular vehicle. It might be different elsewhere, because today on a fuel tank, or we can obviously swap sides, or we can swap with our blue, or we can even fit a longer hose. But so understanding even the basic thing where the charging is a real key part of the consultation with the customer to work together in collaboration, not only with the legislation, the operation, the infrastructure, and of course the driver who will make this work. And one of the things about the DC charging, it's a fantastic opportunity to help promote drivers. You know, obviously during COVID, they were haulage heroes. Now we look, the facilities are still not up to scratch. But when we build a charging station that allows time for DC charging, we really need to consider the facilities that are available to maybe grow and develop this as a career with our future generation of truck drivers. And together, by working collaboratively or in partnership, which is easier to say, we can shape the world we want to live in. So thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you very much, John. We're now going to welcome Sandor to the virtual stage here. Reminder that there are still opportunities to answer your questions after this, so please keep them coming in the Q&A function, not the chat function. Use the Q&A function, please. And yeah, over to Sandor then. Hello.
Hello, good morning all. I'm going to tell something about ABB e-mobility, and I'm going to take you into the journey of e-trucks and making the transition from ICE to e-trucks. First of all, yes, my arrows works or not. Yeah, first of all, I'm going to tell something about ABB e-mobility. Who are we? So we are a global company, manufacturer of EV charging infrastructure, and we have more than 1,000 employees. So we have a big sales force operations in almost every country. We sell our chargers in 88 markets globally, and we are the global market leader for EV charging. We also invest a lot in startups. So we invested in startups which involves energy management, charge planning, charge management. So not only the infrastructure itself, but to guide you with the entire transition to e-trucks. So in every country, we have our specific e-truck expert, which will guide you towards this transition. And I'm going to tell you something about our portfolio. So when changing to an e-truck, we have a range of products which can help you with your daily operations. So it's like AC destination charging. So it's like 3 to 22 kilowatts. Then we have our DC destination charging, DC fast charging, And for this segment, we have developed our transport solutions that's dedicated for depots. So when you have a normal depot, we have a lot of experience with the bus market, also together with Volvo. And from there, we developed our portfolio, especially for e-trucks. But also we're involved with high power charging, like DC charging, where we have like distributed and all-in-one systems. And together with our team in Delft, the Netherlands, we are working on the MCS fast charging. So that will be from 1 to 3 megawatts. But to switch from ICE to e-truck, it's not just putting one charger, and that's easy. That's the easy part. But things are going to become difficult when changing your entire fleet to e-trucks. And that's why I'm going to tell you something about how we divided transport. So 85% of modern economies drives below 150 miles a day. They will primarily charge at their depot or their hub. So at their depot, they will charge with a 9 to 5 operation between 50 and 150 kilowatts. But you also have an operation where you have a 24/7 operation. So you don't have the time to do like overnight charging. Then you need higher power. And when you need higher power, there also comes things like energy management. That's all come into place. And there we're going to advise you with. So there we have a power range of 350 kilowatt, but also possibly going to the megawatt. And there we use emergency charging at public charging. So 90% of all charges will be at the depot. This gives you an impression how the depot could look like. Like already mentioned before, you can have an inlet on one side or on other side, but how can you choose the appropriate charging infrastructure with a mixed fleet, but also the length of the vehicles? So does it have a trailer or not? That's really depending on your infrastructure. And there we have a solution with our depot boxes. It's an overhanging construction with cable management, which you can easily connect to your truck. But also you can allow others to charge at your facility, because that's also optimize your return of investment, because you do an investment for charging infrastructure for a longer period of time. But how do you return your investment? That's a real challenging topic, and there we can advise you, because by setting up a location like this, then it all comes into place. What's the grid connection? But also we have dynamic routing, because transport is planned to the minute. So how do I charge my vehicles with my limited grid connection? But also related to pricing, we have pricing of energy. Maybe we should store the energy. We have a battery energy storage system where you can store your energy and then supply it at the most ideal time to your trucks, which optimize your TCO. So it's more that we are into the entire value chain of logistics. It's not only placing charging infrastructure and then it's finished. No, it goes beyond. And this is an example of a depot which has a mixed fleet. So we have like incoming long-haul trucks, but you have last mile distribution going out. On the left side, we have our latest product. It's the Terra 360. It's the world's fastest all-in-one charger. It can deliver up to 360 kilowatts. So you've already seen before, the Volvo truck can handle 250 kilowatts now. So you have a future-proof solution which you can use at your depot. And it also saves you cost in terms of installation. And to all monitor your warehouse or depot, we have developed our own SLA where we can give you guarantees of uptime and provide you with the best working solution. Because in transport, it's all about uptime. Everything's planned to the minute. So you cannot afford to have broken charging infrastructure or not working, because with the current limited public charging, you cannot go with your truck to a normal site because there's a canopy. You cannot go underneath it, or there are passenger vehicles. So that's why you need to have reliable infrastructure, and at ABB we have it. And now I'm going to the long-haul trucks, so the 500 miles and up. There, I see they will charge at the depot, but their public charging really comes into place. And that's also where megawatt charging will come into place. Because during the mandatory 45 minutes of rest, you would really like to charge to drive another 4.5 hours, also due to the European law. So they will charge at en route at public charging, and then they will charge again at their destination or depot. And ABB is involved with the megawatt charging. So megawatt charging will really be the enabler for long-haul transport. Because currently we have our CCS, which you can charge up to 350 kilowatts. But we are working together with OEMs and other companies to develop the megawatt charging standard, which can deliver up to 3 megawatts. That means that you could charge your truck within 6 minutes when you talk about 3 megawatts. It's making a huge difference, but it also involves challenges like energy capacity, heat, where will be the location of the connector, how long should the cable be, all technical things, but also on the commercial side of things. So that's why we are currently developing the megawatt charging, and we already have some nice projects running, which I will show later. But this is an example of how could the site of the future look like. On top, we have the megawatt charging when the trucks come in, fast charging, and then proceed their way. Below, we have like 175 up to 350 kilowatt CCS charging, where we have it like semi-fast. And on the right, we have overnight charging. So that means truck parkings, where you have the time to charge. And this is also a very important segment for long-haul trucking, and that's why it's really the best way to charge your truck. I also want to give you some examples of projects that we are running. That's the e-charge product in Sweden. This is really about long-haul trucking. That means that we have an MCS project where you have 4.5 hours of driving, 45 minutes of charging time, and then drive another 4.5 hours. That's a typical use case for long-haul transport. This is a project that's being deployed in about 2023, 2024. So it's quite fast already. So that's what I want to tell you, that we are not only working on it, but we are actually doing it together with our OEMs. So together with Volvo, we're doing this project in Sweden. And if you would like to want more information about this project, you can contact me. And not only Sweden, but we have also similar projects running in Germany and eventually also in the UK. So if you're interested in megawatt charging, please reach out to me or our local team in the UK. And I would like to thank you very much and have a fully charged day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandal. Right, we've had an awful lot of questions come whizzing in there. Now I'm just going to turn all the speakers back on again. We can see our lovely and not so lovely faces. There we are. Everyone except me, it would have been. There we are. There I am. And yes, so we've got a few questions coming in all over the place. They're in some in the chat function and some in the Q&A bit. So I'll pick a difficult question to begin with, and then I'll give me time to sort through the rest of them. So let's find something hard for you guys to talk about. Right. So John mentioned the Euro 7 standard, which isn't really nailed down as such, is it really? So what's the panel's view on the place that the EU developed regulation will have in the UK, bearing in mind the trajectory towards 2040, but also beyond this point? So I think that's how will the Euro standard affect us as the UK, and what will it mean getting to as we get closer towards that 2040 zero emission deadline? Who's going to be brave enough to start?
I think maybe I should have a go at that one. So yeah, I mean, obviously we've Brexited now. We are currently working on a new type approval framework. Yeah, I think Brexit's a byword for doing things twice when it comes to vehicle manufacturers. So we obviously will be working with a whole vehicle type approval framework. We will obviously be working primarily with the UN directives for the systems, but under the UK system, we may have individual directives where the EU had them before. As a vehicle manufacturer, we will always develop, because Europe's the bigger market, we will be developing Euro 7, whether the UK chooses to adopt it or not. So we'll be working towards that standard. I suppose the other issue we've got with regards to Brexit is obviously the carbon rules. So obviously we've got European Vecto, we've got UK Vecto, and then obviously there are pipelines. Maybe James could comment on with regards to zero emission vehicle mandates to obviously help with the phase out and phase in of the transition in 2035 and 2040. So from a vehicle manufacturer, it's on the cards whether UK adopts it or not within the framework. That's really a sort of political decision.
Indeed, yeah, and on the ZEV mandates, yeah, there are certain sectors where that's being consulted on as we speak. Not heavy goods vehicles or commercial vehicles as it stands, other than potentially vans. But yes, one might suggest that if it's applicable and successful in one area, it might scale across to the other areas as well.
Thank you. Sander, anything to add?
Yes, I think it's really important to have a global, or at least a standard, which helps us also in our part as a charging infrastructure manufacturer, because there are challenges also related to power and inlets and length of cables, all those kind of technical things. When you're talking about daily operations, we should be aligned there, definitely.
So we have another question here for everybody really again. So for all the technology variants, battery electric versus fuel cell versus biocombustion, what are the technical core challenges for market implementation and for development perspectives? So I guess it's the arguments for and against for each of those. Sounds like another one for John to start off on, I'm afraid. Sorry, mate.
Yeah, I think it was really interesting to listen to Sander's developments with regards to the charging, because everything for all of these systems to work, it's collaboration with the energy provider. Obviously today we've got Shell, BP, Esso, supermarkets, and energy on every street corner. So diesel works. I mean, the key element for the truck side of the business is diesel is still the best in terms of energy density. Obviously, it comes with its issues, but we got carbon and air quality controls, and of course, the key benefit of Euro 7 is that air quality will get even better. And then the other one that we've got is obviously we've set these dates out to transition. So there is obviously a concern with regards to solutions that are commercially available today that are delivering, such as diesel with a renewable fuel like HVO, or even gas. But as I say, each of them has a pathway. But obviously, we know that the UK ambition 2035 and 2040 is zero tailpipe. So how people transition into one mode and out of another will be interesting. But the segment, as we talked about earlier, the segment is the key factor. What service are you delivering, and can you still deliver that service to your customer using an alternative? You know, everybody wants to be green and doing the right thing, but you know, they've still got a business to run and they've still got a service to deliver.
And I think if I can follow up as well on the kind of the technical aspects around battery electric and fuel cells. So in terms of challenges or maybe opportunity, battery energy density for sure, I think, and the associated cost that goes with it. That is not something that can stand still. Current forecasts are that by 2035, the kind of cost of battery, not necessarily its sales price, but certainly the cost, should reduce by 50%. Now, those forecasts were set a couple of years ago. That's not to say it's a long-term trajectory, they're probably about right, but obviously events of recent times, and particularly in around the Ukraine area, etc., actually have seen battery prices go up, as opposed to following the downward trajectory. But overall, longer term, that is definitely something that needs to occur and is forecast to occur. And also different chemistries as well, because that unlocks, you know, quite a lot of issues there in terms of affordability and impact on payloads and everything else. Commenting on fuel cells, hydrogen fuel cells, because I think that was in there as well. I mean, I guess the first thing is to remember that hydrogen fuel cell systems have batteries too. So they have some of the similar challenges of the battery electric. And I think, obviously, you know, we spoke about electrical infrastructure. With hydrogen, there becomes a hydrogen fueling infrastructure, so that's another challenge. And indeed, hence why those two items are included in reserve. But also, and this is probably where I want to pull a pin and throw a grenade, is around the kind of the source of low carbon hydrogen as well. So, and how that's manufactured and supplied and developed in sufficient quantities. Grey hydrogen, I'm kind of crossing over questions here, George, so apologies, but grey hydrogen, whichever way you look at it, and as John mentioned earlier, we too are very supportive of looking at the whole life cycle of greenhouse gas emissions. Grey isn't great for greenhouse gas emissions. I think that's probably the best way to put that, although it's the one that's more commercially and readily available. Blue hydrogen needs carbon capture and storage. You know, that's kind of, I know that's not directly related to the vehicle, but this whole thing is kind of a system. So in terms of technical obstacles, you know, there's one where, you know, developing CCS at large scale to basically allow blue hydrogen to be, you know, more acceptable from the greenhouse gas emissions perspective. And then green, just generating enough of it, getting that capacity in the supply. So that's kind of what I'd say on the battery and the fuel cell.
Yeah, and I'm really, of course, into the e-truck charging. So it means that I really believe in long-haul trucking, like MCS, because why should you storage energy or transport it from A to B? I'm more into looking at the entire chain from wheel to well, and then charging is the obvious choice. Also looking at operating costs. If you compare to diesel, for example, yeah, it's a no-brainer then.
Absolutely. We mentioned it there. Well, James mentioned it. There's a question here about the crossover point, price parity between an ICE vehicle and electric and hydrogen versions. So you said there briefly about 2040 being the time when there is some sort of convergence, but I think they're talking more about the total cost of ownership as well. So the charging rates, I suppose, Sandor said there that there'll be megawatt charging, and they're all going to be at different price points as well, I would imagine, because of the speed of delivery and convenience, etc. So is there any, has anyone come across, or does anybody have any thoughts on when there might be more of a price parity between what we know as traditional diesel vehicle costs compared to a more comparable diesel zero emission vehicle world where we can do 6-minute fill ups and carry on as normal again, and have a vehicle that is as usable and long ranging as a diesel vehicle?
Yeah, I see it more from a EU broader perspective. There, in many countries are already parity. So, for example, in Germany, there is already a parity compared to ICE, but that's also because the government there have funded 80% of the extra cost of a zero emission vehicle. So that enables e-trucks, of course, because when you look at the daily operating cost of an e-truck, they're real lower compared to ICE. So it's also depending on government funding programs. And then it's great to see that you already have the 200 million funding program from the government, but I think there should be more investment from the government there.
Yeah, the difference between what other countries are offering with that price delta between diesel and electric is quite dramatic, and I think our incentives don't even come close to quite matching up to that, because the difference between an ICE vehicle and a zero emission battery electric or hydrogen fuel cell will be so big for the time being, and if 80% is covering it, that's a very significant contribution. But yeah, perhaps there's change will change.
Yeah, but for sure, and I think another useful parallel, John mentioned buses. Bus adoption in the UK for zero emissions has been one of the success stories, and commercially it works, but it is heavily incentivized. It's really just reinforcing the point that's just been made. It is incentivized in a different way to the commercial vehicle sector at this point in time. And you probably won't be surprised to see that in the government consultation responses that they got, people pointed that out. So that's definitely been raised and as an awareness. I think in terms of without incentives, trying to work out when that crossover point might be, that I think is quite challenging. I mean, John probably would know more from being an OEM. But there are lots of variables in there. I mean, certainly from a car perspective, passenger car, it's reasonably well understood between ICE and battery electric. But even that changed in the last 6 months. With energy prices increasing and fuel prices increasing, and availability of components. So it's quite a variable thing. But without incentivization, it's difficult to see how the parity is achieved in the short to medium term.
Yeah, but that's also why we at ABB E-Mobility advise infrastructure, but also to use it, for example, as for public use. So that has also big influence on your TCO of your entire fleet. So we look broader than only the daily operations, but the business model. What will be the business model for you as an owner for investing in charging infrastructure and e-trucks? When will be a return of investment? All those questions pop up.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's not just the cost of the vehicle, is it? It's that charging infrastructure is going to be very costly as well. So there's incentives for that would really help speed things up. There's an awful lot of some quite technical questions coming in now as well. So I might rattle through some of these. Somebody's asking here, would liquid ammonia fuel cells be a better option because of the higher energy density? Anybody want to take that one?
I'll give it a go. I'm not an expert. Yeah, I mean, ammonia actually is an area of interest in marine as well, for similar reasons. And such fuel cell technologies do exist. They're probably slightly less mature than the more traditional hydrogen fuel cells that are around. So I'm not quite sure when they could come to market and scale. And also ammonia is a bit of a tricky fuel to manage and handle. So I think there might be a couple of restrictions around there. So I wouldn't say technically it's feasible. I think probably there are a number of obstacles that might make hydrogen a more popular choice.
John, there's a question for you. Someone's asked here, what's the WB on the 6x2 Arctic? I've seen the wheelbase of the 6x2 Arctic, but also
Yeah, the wheelbase on the tag, the wheelbase for all tractors is either 3.8 or 3.9 meters. So whether it's a 4x2, a 6x2, or 6x4, it is an incredibly long wheelbase. It works really well on a 4x2, but obviously due to the energy, we've got to put the axle behind, so you end up with very long wheelbase tractors. And with the battery technology at this moment in time, it doesn't look as though they're going to get any shorter. And if we're going to add catenary, maybe that's not been discussed yet. It's not a route that Volvo wants to take. You've obviously got to find space for a catenary structure. And obviously for hydrogen fuel cells, you've also got to find, you may have smaller batteries, but you've got to find space for the hydrogen tanks on board. So we need a critical review of weights and dimensions to allow these trucks to work, because we've got to bear in mind that the trailer fleet will not change overnight. You know, there's over 250,000 semi-trailers out there. And we've got to try and make these vehicles work within the systems that they do, because they're very much part of the warehouse process.
Yeah, the ecosystem isn't going to change overnight, and
yeah,
all those trailers aren't going to just suddenly come off the road and be different, are they? With that in mind, there's a question here for, should we push for 44 tons on 5 axles?
Yeah, 40. I mean, again, the 44 ton on 5 axles. Yeah, you could physically just about do it again, but we're hungry for axle capacity, because obviously the base truck has moved. You know, a two axle truck today is around about 7.5 ton. Now that vehicle's 10 ton. So the batteries are taking more of the axle demand than the payload. And again, we just got to work with it. Again, all the trucks that we're offering will be on full air suspension, and obviously one of the benefits of full air suspension means that we will have load indication as standard. So everybody knows. So everybody knows that what weight is on the vehicle, particularly if you're interchanging between diesel and electric.
Sandor, could 43 kilowatt AC chargers be used for overnight charging? Is the question here.
In terms of power, it could be used, of course, but I strongly recommend DC charging, also to avoid onboard chargers and have it in the infrastructure of the charger itself. But I definitely believe in overnight charging, yes.
And also another one for you there, Sandor. Is there a consideration for semi-public HEV charging, shared charging facilities at logistics hubs, multiple users based at the location? Does ABB see issues with this? So you've mentioned about using it to increase your TCO, but what are the pitfalls, I suppose, the problems that operators might encounter around that?
Yeah. We're already working on initiatives to share infrastructure with our customers today, because they already and we as well have identified it, and I'm sure that it will pop up. There are in Europe already initiatives for setting up a network. Even with Volvo, there's an initiative to with the truck JV to deploy a mass network for charging infrastructure for e-trucks. So it will definitely come, I'm sure.
Sticking with the charging theme, is MW charging supposed to be available at every fuel station as of today? Is this still working with multiple trucks charging at the same time? Not sure I fully understand that one. Sandra?
Yeah, so I guess that relates to if you achieve your 3 megawatts with a single truck, but if 10 trucks turn up, is that now 300 kilowatts per truck?
Yeah.
Power across the top.
Yeah, in the end, in the future, it will all be dynamic, because also from an operator perspective, if you have one truck which has the capacity, or charger has the capacity of 3 megawatt, for example, but only uses maybe 600 kilowatt. Yeah, what do you do with it? It could be quite costly. So that's why there will be, of course, developments in that area.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, Samuel, because it's something that we can see emerging in the passenger car market about. It's a little bit of sort of almost consumer information and awareness of vehicle type. This may not be something that's commercial vehicle applicable, but in terms of people going to the right charger for their vehicle. So their vehicle can only charge at, say, 50 kilowatts, but they go to a 350 kilowatt charger. The time it takes them to charge up, is a lost opportunity for 4 or 5 other vehicles that could actually charge 250 kilowatts. So
that's why I also really believe in the megawatt charging standard, because the megawatt charging standard is everything up to 350 kilowatts. So with that standard, you also avoid having like passenger cars in your truck lane, which you also don't have at the gas pumps right now. So that's why I really believe in the megawatt charging standard.
Cheeky car drivers thinking they can get a faster charge out of using the truck lane.
And the car, well, I mean, it'll be different plugs for megawatt, but the cars will charge, they'll just charge slowly. So anybody who can charge fast is a lost opportunity, and it's a downward spiral.
Another sort of general question here, I suppose. Do you envisage battery electric vehicles becoming more affordable going forward? And am I correct in saying 42 tons and a 4x2 configuration will become the norm for the UK due to the overall length legislations? As an operator of 1,000 trucks, all 44 tons, do you think National Grid being able to cope with charging this number of trucks, and will it require substations being installed at depots? Yeah, okay, so there's multiple questions in there. Let's deal with the weight limit there. So 42 tons on a 4x2.
Yeah, we again, the general statement that came out last Thursday was, we were looking at a 2-ton additional weight for the vehicles involved in the consultation. What we have, as Volvo, gone back to the Department of Transport and said, using some of the presentation material that we use today, diagrammatically, what does this really mean? Because obviously we need to make that consultation going forward. 42-ton is allowable in Europe with zero tailpipe, so we believe that there isn't an issue there. The key issue for us with 42-ton is obviously making it work with the axle loadings and the additional weight and the weight distribution of the batteries, because obviously we want a legal and compliant and clean truck to operate. So we will work continually with the DFT because they've got decarbonisation and they've got weights and dimensions and they've got other, to pull that together, because it's important for all of us as vehicle manufacturers, because we don't want to sell, very expensive trucks that end up parked up in the corner because something was overlooked. So it's a key element. And
Sandor, there's this concern here. This operator has more than 1,000 trucks. Are they going to be having to install substations at every depot in order to make sure they can power all these vehicles?
Yeah, that's also what I mentioned before in my presentation. When changing a fleet for 1 or 2 vehicles, it's quite easy. But when changing your entire fleet with like 1,000 trucks, then energy management, but also battery energy storage, because you can have a smaller grid connection, but also load management and charge planning. For example, when you have like a routing, when next route is 100 kilometers or 100 miles, then you should not fill up your entire battery and take all the usage of your grid connection. So that's why we already have these solutions in our portfolio. So we can help companies there. But also the grid operators needs to invest in a better infrastructure there.
Absolutely. And somebody's asking again, do we see any sign of proper incentives and help with all of that infrastructure grants and payments?
So at the moment declared, though it's kind of really, as per my slide summary, awareness of, yes. John touched on Project Rapid, which is focused on cars and vans at the moment, in terms of infrastructure and funding that. There is an acknowledgement from the new government, as I understand it, that they're looking at whether that scope can be expanded to include HCVs and heavy duty vehicles. So for sure, yeah, it's very much a challenge.
Yeah. Another question here is, could we integrate the battery in the inverter into a trailer? I mean, so that the trailer could, I mean, I guess it would be possible, but you're then eating into the real usable areas of the vehicle, I suppose. But John, your views on putting, as not a trailer manufacturer, but somebody with.
Well, I mean, one of our biggest stakeholders in this whole process is not just the trailer manufacturer, but the bodybuilders. So, you know, we've got lots of orange cables, 600-volt cables on these vehicles, and we obviously have a huge training program with our own technicians. So whether we do ERTEC or IMI for diesel vehicles, we have to accredit our own technicians, and we have to recertify every 18 months working on these cables. And similarly, we have to do the same with bodybuilders. We have to look at the methodology in place, and we have a whole process of commissioning and decommissioning. So it's slightly difficult when you've got 600 volt to say, I want to plug this in and plug this out in relation to a SUSI connection. I suppose the other element, of course, is the ability for trailers to swap. Where is that trailer to be if you could physically do it? And of course, the physical cost to have that energy on board that trailer. Yes, in terms of overall logic for the distribution cycle, it makes sense, because the trailer spends most of its time, or a larger part of its time, in the ratio of around about 2.5 to 1 tractor unit. It's the other aspects, or the other circular issues with regards the safety for the driver and working with the vehicle.
A question about the recycling side of it.
The recycling, obviously we still have usable life in the battery, and obviously we've got today we have Volvo Penta, who have a whole host or a big business powering other systems, but whether it be generators or beautiful Sunseeker boats. So we know a bit about power generation, and obviously we have a business chain where these batteries would be very, very valuable in terms of power generation. I think one of the interesting issues is obviously the physical value of the vehicle at the end of its life, in terms of the cost to repower that vehicle to put it in. Today, when a diesel vehicle ends its life, its energy storage system is still with the vehicle. When these vehicles end their life and the battery's gone one place, you've got a 10-year-old vehicle. So what's the investment pattern to put renewable batteries on that? And that's something that obviously we have to work with. And obviously one of the other key elements when we were talking about cost is, do you purchase these vehicles anymore, or do you look at transportation as a service in terms of the financial aspects of operating this type of truck?
Yeah, I think I'd add, recycling, particularly batteries, it's pretty much key and fundamental. So as John mentioned, there are definitely options around second life, but actually recycling and extracting those key minerals that are potentially in short supply, or from the perspective of security of supply chain, fundamental to battery recycling, feed those components back in to manufacture new batteries as well.
We've got a question here about the cooling issues, or potential cooling issues around megawatt charging. It does generate an awful lot of heat, doesn't it, Sandor?
It definitely generates a lot of heat. So that's also why we really look into the actual specs or cable lengths, all those kind of things, how we should develop the cables and the cooling as well. Yeah, definitely.
And Sandor, just a bit, sorry, George, just a quick one, and that includes cooling of the charging cables as well.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Cooling of the cables,
Yeah.
because when you have power like 1 megawatt running through a cable, you need to take things in account. One is, of course, the heat, but the other is also the derating and the length of the cable. Because when you have a megawatt running through your cable, by only adding 1 meter of cable, you can have a derating of almost 10 kilowatts in your cable. And then the second question pops up: who's going to pay for the 10 kilowatts? So it has some still have some challenges, but we are working on it. So I'm positive.
And so we're already at 250 kilowatt charging for the Volvo electric vehicles at the moment. How far away is Megawatt Charging in the product as an OEM, John?
At this moment in time, I haven't got a timeline date for you on that. So you know, I would say it's probably more towards the end of the decade. You know, but we haven't got a timeline on that.
Right. Watch this space.
Watch that space.
By then they'll have sorted out the cooling issues, so that'll be fine.
Yeah.
The batteries will be smaller.
I mean that is the problem, isn't it? It's like early adoption, and then all of a sudden it just goes at a pace. You know, it's the technology map and the gates that drive this. Again, Sander talked about, you know, the projects that are already in development in Sweden. So, yeah, but the key thing that is anything before you launch anything onto the market, like a diesel truck, it's got to deliver the service and be reliable. So yeah, it'll be through the normal development process.
And as someone has just pointed out, the faster you charge things, the higher the degradation rates. So that's also something to consider as well, I suppose. If Megawatt Charging is going to have an adverse effect on the lifespan of the battery if you're continually doing these short 6 to 10 minute fuels.
Yeah, and I guess that's dependent to a varying degrees, depending on battery chemistry that's used as well. For sure, in passenger car land, assuming seat technology, yes, like ultra rapid charging does have a degradation effect in the battery.
Yeah, but the battery technology is also developing real fast, so there are developments there as well.
Somebody's asked, is the charging time that you suggested, the 45-minute break, is a good time for that mid-range of charging band? You've used it obviously because it's coincides with the brake requirements, but is there a solution for the US or Asia who don't have brake regulations? I mean, I think it's just 45 minutes is probably a good standard time for doing something, isn't it, out of your truck?
I really think so. I think they're referring to in the US, you have a longer, you can drive 9 to 10 hours before having a mandatory stop. So I think they're referring to that regulations, but I think it's not healthy to drive so long. But yeah, I think that the mandatory 45 minutes, or as ABB as a company, we really like to come as close as possible towards the experience of the normal fueling to optimize it in your daily operations. So that's our goal.
We've got a technical question on voltage rating. 600 volts is mentioned for e-truck cables. Are any moves to higher voltages?
Again, it's something that's obviously in the future plans, but as I said, I've got no comment on that at this moment in time.
Sandor, wireless charging, is that being looked at?
Could be, yeah, could be, but there are advantages and disadvantages to wireless charging. Yeah.
So there's a lot of potential power loss in the process for induction charging, isn't there?
Definitely, when you look at megawatt charging, you also need to look at safety and all those kinds of things. And then I think inductive charging could be a challenge, but yeah, there's also loss.
Yeah, and it obviously has the convenience advantage, but it is also currently anyway quite sensitive to position of vehicle. Place directly over whatever the pad is.
Is anyone talking to the ACEA about updating the FMS standard to support VTG, battery health, charge status, etc.? I'm going to confess I don't do well with abbreviations and acronyms, so I'm a bit confused on that one. Anybody?
What was the question? Obviously, this is in relation to data. So obviously, there's an FMS. Obviously, we have FMS data to allow telematic systems to go on board the vehicle. Again, it's not a particular area that is my speciality, but there are people with Volvo that could take that question. So yeah, I mean, to make this vehicle work, you need a live mobile phone. You need to be able to understand data. I've just taken an electric vehicle, which my wife describes as an iPad on wheels. So you know, data is key, and we will all have obviously OEM data to manage the range and route and mapping on this vehicle.
And I'm guessing VTG is probably vehicle to grid. So the idea of actually feeding excess energy back into the grid, which, you know, potentially from a TCO perspective, and certainly from a grid management perspective, has its advantages. And indeed, that's something that's, I'm not sure about the ACAA or the CIA aspects, but certainly again in other, so again, passenger cars, if you like, that is something that as a standard is due to emerge around 2025. So it's definitely part of the equation, certainly for the likes of the energy networks and distributors. So I imagine, yes, there would need to be something similar. I guess in the standard or in the Megawatt Charging standard, it would have some aspects about VTG and those aspects as well.
Yeah. That's one of the things that we are looking into within the Megawatt Charging project.
There's a question here, how to utilize a vehicle that is double shifted, run at night in the winter with all the lights and heaters on. Yeah, John, it says you're going to answer this question apparently. So
yeah, so yeah, it's part of the range and route simulation. So when we do a consultancy, we can take the data from an existing diesel truck, longitude, latitude. We can do the route, and we will run the route at various temperatures. We can run the route at various times during the day. We can look at the charging that's there on board. And today, a PTO on a truck means something that's hydraulically powered. Tomorrow, or even now, a power takeoff is anything that has electric. So we can simulate the demand for the London cameras. We can simulate the demand for the tail lift. We can simulate the demand for even a refuse body. So we would put all of that into the overall equation in the range and route simulator to do that. And then we would also look at what project the battery life degradation and do that route in year 1, do it in year 8 to see how the vehicle will perform. So, you know, there are some very, very powerful sales tools. It's all about data, using the data, and very much using the data off the vehicle or off the diesel vehicle, which makes it easier because we can take the operation to see if it can be done. We may not do all routes, but maybe we just need to look at routes that are marginal, and there's a balance of routes that maybe have to be done in a different way. But that's part of the new way of selling electric trucks.
There's a bit of a lively discussion going on in the chat window now about the potential for battery swaps, which I've heard people talk about many times because it's been mentioned in passenger cars for a long time. Would somebody like to comment on the feasibility of a battery swap for heavy goods vehicles? I'm pretty sure I know what they might say, but
I could do the starter for 10 if you like, and then John could probably do the kind of add a bit as well. So battery swap, yes, as a concept, can it be done? Yes. You mentioned passenger cars actually there, George. You know, it has been around for a number of years. It kind of disappeared. And actually the chat references one of the key reasons why it disappeared, around standardization across all OEMs in terms of battery. In the lighter vehicles, there's also a trend now towards the battery being a structural element of the vehicle. So that makes its removal a lot more difficult. Heavy duty vehicles, yes, I'm sure John will provide a bit more comment, but so it is feasible. I guess looking at it again in a kind of the overall greenhouse gas emissions and the life cycle perspective, battery swap, what you would need to have in order for it to function is a lot more batteries. Because obviously it's no longer one battery, one vehicle. It's potentially several batteries each vehicle, so that you can obviously swap them over. No, that's not necessarily insurmountable, but I think that from a greenhouse gas emission perspective, it would need looking at to determine how detrimental that may or may not be. Sorry, John, do you want to provide any sanity check there?
Again, on the vehicle within the current architecture, I mean, they weigh half a ton a piece, so there's the physical weight of them. Obviously, there's the connection. Again, when we're working with bodybuilders in the workshop, we have to commission and decommission them. So there is a way of working them, and of course, they're not hung on the chassis like a fuel tank. There is a full cage that goes under the chassis to support the batteries. So yes, it's in theory it's a great idea. I think it's in China. Is it NIO who have an automated garage and workshop system that with the architecture of the car that allows the swap without any human intervention at all. But yes, ideally it would be a lovely thing to do, but there's an awful lot of health and safety and physical things that need to be considered. And as you say, the number of batteries and making sure you end up with the batteries that you want, you know. So yeah, that's my view.
And I think it's, you know, it's potentially a little bit of a race as well. Certainly wouldn't exclude any options, but only the Sandor's, their suggestions about 6-minute charge times. The NIO solution at the moment is a 5-minute swap. So they're kind of, there's a bit of a race on there as to which one's quicker. So maybe the gap isn't as big as perhaps some people might think it is in the future.
Indeed. Guys, that has absolutely whizzed through the Q&A session there, and unfortunately we are now out of time. So thank you very much. It's been very interesting, and I hope everyone has enjoyed listening to it. It will be available to listen back to on the Freight & City website, and somebody's asked a question there about the slide decks, whether they'll be available. I'm sure you guys won't mind if we would share those with our listeners in some way on the Freight & City website. So we will look into that and let you all know with a follow-up email or something along those lines. So thank you very much, guys, and
Thank you.
look forward to seeing you on some other Freight & City webinar.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, George. Cheers, Sander.
Bye-bye.
Cheers, James.
Cheers, John. Thank you.